In this lecture, we'll have a look inside the 3-in-1 IoT Smart Car and Learning Kit for Arduino from SunFounder. This kit contains all of the components that we'll need for the various experiments that make up this course. And I'm going to highlight those components. I'm not going to show you, of course, how they work. There are dedicated lectures for each of the components that we need later on in this course, where I'll show you how to use those components individually and then how they work as a system as part of this experimental car that we are building and the various experiments that will run on this car. Of course, it is possible to construct the car and go through all of the experiments in this course without having purchased this specific kit from SunFounder. You can relatively easily source all the parts that you need from various online sources such as eBay or Amazon. It's just that the kit makes it easy to get everything you need with one single purchase. But once you know what components you need, then you can decide for yourself whether you'd like to go ahead and get them as part of a kit or get them individually from a variety of online sources. So let's get started. Once you open up the box, you'll find the wheels for the car on the side. I'll put those out for the time being. And you've got the kit, which contains all of the electronic components like this, and there's a few tools in there as well. And in the bottom of the box, you'll find the chassis for our car. It looks like this. So the chassis is protected with adhesive paper, which you can remove if you want. I decided to actually keep the paper on because it is paper, which means it allows you to write little markings like that, so you can easily figure out which side is A and B as you're following with the instructions. So totally up to you. I'm going to put this aside now and have a look inside the plastic box. The underside of the cover has a list of all the components that are included. It's a quick reference guide. It shows you everything that's in the box so that you know what's in it without having to dig through it looking for particular components. So one thing to remember here is before I go any further is that obviously I've been playing with this kit for a while now, so all the components you just see did actually come with this kit, but they were a lot more tidy when the kit arrived. Now they look like a total mess because I've been playing with them, and just keep that in mind. When I received this kit for the first time, things in it were actually nicely organized. Everything pretty much was in bags to protect them. For example, the ESP8266 or ESP01 board, which we'll be using for Wi-Fi connectivity, this came protected in an anti-static bag, which of course I got it out of in order to be able to use it. But pretty much all of the sensitive components will be protected in a plastic anti-static bag. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to show you the components that we'll be using for our car experiments so that you know what's coming up, and you can then decide which of those components you'd like to purchase separately. Starting from the very top, I've got the ESP8266. You can also find this device titled or named as ESP01. It's essentially a microcontroller board with just a handful of input-output pins, and we'll be using this microcontroller as a serial Wi-Fi module. The microcontroller is the ESP8266, and it already has the Wi-Fi required firmware burned on it, so we're not going to have to do anything to it other than just start changing some of its settings in order to use it with our sketches. And because, as you can see here on the underside, its pin configuration is not really compatible for our breadboard. It comes in a 2x4 pin configuration. We'll be using this adapter here. We can connect the ESP01 onto the adapter like this, and that breaks out the 2x4 pin configuration into a breadboard compatible pin configuration. So then we'll be able to use our breadboard there's also a mini breadboard inside the box, but I'll show you with this longer breadboard what it looks like. We'll be able to plug in the adapter like this, and now we'll be able to connect the pins to the Arduino Uno microcontroller easily. So that's an important part of our course. We'll be using this adapter and Wi-Fi module in one of our experiments. Put it aside. Another component that we'll be using is this infrared sensor. We'll use this infrared sensor alongside with the infrared remote control to wirelessly control movement on our Arduino car. So these two go there. We're not going to be using the sensor. We'll be using one of those LEDs just as a indicator of the functions that we are sending to the car. So for example, every time we press a button on the remote control to verify that the command has been received, we'll have one of these LEDs flashing. You just need one of those LEDs. There is an experiment that comes with the 3-in-1 kit that shows you how to get your car to follow a line. And this is one of the two modules that are required. This is a line follower module, and we'll assemble it onto the chassis, and that will allow the car to be able to detect the line and to follow it. Okay. These plastic bits here are used with the chassis to help us mount the DC motors that are inside the box. So make sure you've got 4 of these as well, 2 for each motor. There's some Velcro tape here. This allows us to stick the battery onto the chassis, the battery actually and the mini breadboard onto the chassis. I've already attached one of those Velcro tapes onto the underside of the chassis. The other part is here on the 9-volt battery, which is included with the kit. So batteries are included. You'll be able to use this tape to safely attach, in this case, a battery to the chassis. It goes there. I'll put this back in because I'll need it later. All right, we're not going to need anything else from this tray for the purposes of this course. So I'll put this aside. Of course, there is the microcontroller board itself. This is an Arduino Uno compatible board. This is actually well made for a compatible board, so you can use that. In my case, I'll be using the genuine Arduino Uno board like this, but they're fully compatible, so it's totally up to you which one you'd like to use. There is the mini breadboard that I mentioned. We'll use this mini breadboard attached onto probably the front. This is the front. We'll use it on the front of the car chassis because that will allow us to assemble experiment components easily in different configurations, then remove them and make room for the next experiment. And again, I'll use a bit of Velcro to attach it onto the car, or alternatively, you can just remove the backing of this adhesive tape and use that to securely attach the breadboard onto the chassis. It's up to you. I'll probably do that myself. Then we have the 2 DC motors with the gear system as well. So the gear system that is enclosed in those yellow cases allow us to provide a bit more fine movement as it's coming out of the motor, because the motor itself would be spinning quite fast naturally. So you can use reduction gears in order to increase the torque on the wheels and reduce the speed consecutively. In the wheels, you don't need to use screws. The wheels just securely attach onto the shaft here of the motor like this, just by pushing them in. There's indentations to make sure that the wheels are not spinning independently of the motor. So you can just gently push that in, and then you've got your wheel attached to the motor. Okay, so you've got two of those, but the motors cannot operate without a motor controller. So we'll be using this motor controller. It's a standard L298N. I have a detailed set of lectures on how to use this motor controller in my other course, Arduino Step-by-Step Getting Serious. So I'm still going to show you how to use this motor controller with the two DC motors in this course, but I'm not going to go into the fine details. You can look up those details in the dedicated lectures in Arduino Step-by-Step Getting Serious, and do that just to save a little bit of time in this course. All right, there's lots of jumper wires like this in different configurations. So male, both sides, male and female. So you can use the jumper wires as needed with the breadboard. A few other things that we're not going to be using, spacers, yes, spacers and screws. So these are very well labeled, so we'll be able to use those labels to make reference to which of those spacers you need to use when the time comes to assemble the chassis. There's a second ESP01 or ESP8266 microcontroller. There's not a second adapter, there's only one adapter, but there are two of those boards. There is the caster front wheel for the chassis. Going to go to the front. There's a joystick. So this joystick is going to be used in one of the experiments in this course. We'll be able to use it to control the movement of the robot using a wired example instead of wireless. It's also got a button function, which we won't be using. We'll just be using the 4 directions. There is a ultrasonic distance sensor. We'll use this sensor here to introduce a safety feature on our car. So we'll get our car to be able to detect obstacles and then stop before it crashes onto an obstacle. Assorted resistors, we'll be using a couple of those. There's tools included. Phillips screwdriver set. And there are a few nuts as well. Along the screws, we'll be using those to mount the DC motors onto the chassis. And that's about it. There's a few other bits and pieces here that we won't be using in this course, but I'll be using some of those components in another course that I'm also working on, it just to take advantage of all the capabilities, all the experiments that this kit allows us to construct. Okay, and that's it with the kit and the hardware for this course. Let's have a look at the next lecture where we'll talk about the software side of things.